action can actually shift some of these layers, but despite of that, the foil was so tightly applied that actually none of that happened in the area of the head and face. It was so tightly actually wrapping the upper body area. And then finally, also shows the confirmation, of course, that's her, because part of her onesie is visible in this corner. That's kind of a common theme throughout all of these photographs, that we know it's her. Now, the rest of her body has not been manipulated yet, which is kind of very important, because when we finally move to the next stage and move over the blanket, which is clearly visible in this photograph, that's going to show us actually exactly how she was positioned, how she was discovered before her body kind of rectified and put in the anatomic position, which would be the only position that we can do forensic examination, forensic autopsy at the end of this whole process.
Doctor, can you state the kind of asphyxiation that is involved and demonstrated or shown in this particular photograph, Exhibit 12?
So that would also go with the some parts of the confined space asphyxia, because obviously that the foil and the plastic bag and the garbage can, they're all different layers of that confined space. Mechanical asphyxia, because it's tightly applied to her face along with the blanket, so that would be mechanically prevent oxygen from entering her upper airway. And then parts of or factors in traumatic asphyxia is just the position of the body. We can see some of that position of the body because the head is very overextended, tilted, and then essentially part of her arm that it's starting to show in this photograph is at the level of the feet, which are at the bottom of this whole body. So it shows at least three elements or mechanism of the asphyxia in this particular photograph.
And very briefly, you mentioned purge fluid. Would you explain what that term means?
So with the autolysis or breakdown of the tissue after death and the creation of decomposition kind of chemicals, they liquefy the soft tissues, including the fat, and some of the purge fluid comes mostly from the internal organs and then releases from the body originally and initially through the facial orifices or opening in the face, such as the nose and the mouth, and then later on throughout the decomposition, actually when the epidermis of the first layer of skin detaches, then some of that fluid can start oozing from the rest of the body, and that can compromise the integrity of the body and the integrity of all the layers in a case like this quite extensively, and that's why the removal has to be done very carefully, layer by layer, and then with extreme care not to remove soft tissues from the body where these layers are tightly applied, whether it's clothing or the blanket or the aluminum foil in this particular photograph.
And when you talk about compromising post-mortem or positioning, you mean that if not for the fluid, that actually aluminum foil or the blankets would even be tighter across the face and the head of the body?
That's correct.
And also, would it be correct to say that the more fluid you have in the decomposition that you talked about would be consistent with the body being in that position, in that location, a longer amount of time, the more decomposition you have in the amount of purge fluids. Is that correct?
That's correct. And then that's part of the series of photos that shows the differential decomposition in her body, which is important in this context of the case and how she was positioned. Because there was a soft decomposition and purge fluid in the upper part of the body, and then desiccation, drying out, almost what we call mummification in the lower parts of the body, but that's because the body was upside down and it was not manipulated after that. It was left put in that position or left in that position throughout its postmortem interval.
And we'll go to photo exhibit number 13. What is significant for the purpose of this hearing?
So the significance essentially, again, is that the evidence has to be taken layer by layer, sequential fashion. Finally, most of the foil looks like it's removed. It shows the imprint of decomposition fluid in parts of the foil that are covering the scalp and the face. And then the next phase now is the removal of the blanket that is tightly applied to the face, because in one of the subsequent photographs, we're going to see actually the face itself and how the blanket left the imprint of the pattern on the face, meaning that it was in that position and compressing the face and against the wall of the garbage trash can for a prolonged period of time during the postmortem interval. Another thing that really emerges now in this photograph is that her head is completely tilted. The back of the head is actually touching the upper back, and the shoulder and the arm are bent, and they're at the level actually of her gluteal area, of her buttocks, and then essentially that's how she's kind of twisted in a reverse letter S shape, and that's in that shape now. It's emerging as we are now removing the blanket from her.
Would that be an example of traumatic and mechanical asphyxiation?
That's correct. The thick layers of the blanket, that it's kind of folded over the face, and then also the position of the body in this S shape and the upside down position, and that would be traumatic component.
And this is something the child would not be able to do on its own. This would be done by a person, another individual would have to be consistent with that. Would that be correct?
That's correct. To be packaged like this, positioned like this, and in that particular location, yeah, there has to be an adult.
Number 14, could you again explain we have a description, but would you explain the significance of this photograph?
So finally the foil is removed, which is then submitted separately as an evidence. The staining inside the foil, you can see where the scalp is, where the face is, which is a little bit a darker area, and that's because a lot of purge fluid is going to have some blood elements in it, and it's going to look like blood, because it does contain blood. And then, of course, the severe overextension of her head and neck area is really emphasized in this particular photograph, being against her back, and then her now right upper arm is exposed, and then the next is going to be removal of the blanket.
Does this photograph again corroborate by taking another layer, showing just how tightly applied the aluminum foil and how snug that it was to the head?
Yes, it was snug, it was voluminous, and then on top of that now we are emphasizing the unnatural overextension or reverse letter S shape of the body, how it was placed in the trash bag in the trash can.
Would this be consistent with traumatic and mechanical and positional asphyxiation?
Yes.
So next we'll go to exhibit number 15. Again, I'll ask you the same question. What is significant in this photograph?
So the significance now is just that the close-up of that particular position of the child, that now the blanket remains in a certain position before it's removed, and it's just a close-up that shows better now where the head is, where the occipital, the back of the head is, in relationship to the right shoulder, to the upper back, and then to her to her behind, and then the feet there are kind of emerging, because essentially what was on the right-hand side of this photograph is what was originally presented at the scene in the trash can, because that was the kind of up or the top layer after the black bag was removed.
So this would again represent another stage of examining the child, and another stage in determining the cause in the matter of death. Would that be fair
That's
to say?
correct. And then also what's seen now better is that in the body pouch, that all of this is now happening in order to contain the evidence and keep it kind of clean and separate from the rest of the environment, is that you can see there is still a lot of that purge and body fluid being released, all that yellow-brown staining that is on the blanket and also in the pouch essentially means there's still active decomposition taking place. And it's still happening after such a prolonged period of time because of the confined space, because there was not so much easy access to the flies, and there's some, but not as many as she would have been exposed to without being in confined space.
So this shows a continued shift of the foil and the blanket, which is again the compromise or post-mortem positioning. Would that be fair to say? This again shows you another stage within the development of uncovering this body. Is that correct?
Yes, essentially it explains, close up why the lower body and the legs are still kind of wrapped, where the upper body, there's a shift in the blanket, and that's happening because of decomposition fluid and fat liquefaction that is actually creating kind of semi-liquid slick environment that is going to remove, or starting to remove or shift these elements.
Now we go to number 16, and again, if you would tell the court the significance of this photograph.
So this is essentially the same position, the same stage, however, it's a different angle. And from this angle, it can be appreciated where the back of her head is in relationship to her back and the gluteal or area buttocks. And then you can see also the skid-resistant texture of the foot. That's actually kind of foot under her, a little behind, and that's essentially what was originally presented at the scene.
Would this show another, I guess, a little more clearly the natural kind of folding and positioning, compressing of the body?
Yes, that's bilateral folding in addition to the upside down position and the compression, yes.
And would this be considered traumatic and mechanical and positional asphyxia?
Yes, this actually corroborates the positional and the traumatic asphyxia in the trash can.
And I believe in your report you talk about compaction. Is this an example of compaction? Is that what this is?
Yes, just because of the unnatural folding of the body, yes. And overextension. Yeah.
Then we go to number 17, exhibit number 17. Again, I'll ask you.
So this is the third photograph taken from the same stage in recovery and removal, but the front of the body is now presented with the blanket being over the face, and that's essentially going to set the stage for the following photograph that shows the imprint of the blanket and kind of deformity of the facial features because of the compression of the blanket and the trash bag and the trash can. The amount of decomposition fluid that would compromise some of these relationships, and why actually blanket did shift in some areas of the upper body, and it's just a different angle that corroborates the findings and why the blanket is found in the condition that it was in.
And again, I'm going to ask your opinion within reason, certainly. Would this be inconsistent, or would it be consistent with a haphazard action, or would this be consistent with a deliberate action based on what you can see in this photograph from this angle?
So in none of these stages, there's no haphazard. Actually, this was like a really well packaged application, and the positioning of the foil of the blanket in the trash can and within the trash can.
So
trash
this would
bag
be
and trash can.
mechanical asphyxiation, is that correct?
Yes, the face was compressed, so that will be part of the mechanical. Yes, sir.
And then that takes us to number 18. If you could explain what is shown and the significance in this photograph.
So that will be the next stage in recovery, where the blanket is now being removed. The lower body, kind of the ankles and the legs are crossed, and they're against the lower part of the buttock or the gluteal region. Her right upper arm is visible, and then of course the folding of the head and neck actually really stands out in this particular photograph before the blanket is removed from the face.
Is this child in a fetal position?
She's kind of in distorted fetal position, and distorted meaning that there's overextension of the head and neck area in a very unnatural way that should prohibit even an adult person from breathing, let alone a child.
So this was not something the child would naturally have been into. This would have been something that, again, you say manipulated in mechanical means?
Yeah, that's correct. She's overextended with her head, back of the head touching the back in a kind of really extreme extension.
Would this require some amount of force to put the child in that fetal position?
So I cannot really tell at which stage she assumed this, because some of this position could be just because of the post-mortem position of the body, with her kind of her lower parts compressing, with her own weight compressing her and pushing her down. So some of that would be actually the weight of her own body in that trash bag, in the trash can, kind of. But obviously, she had to be put in the position with the overextension of the face and head to begin with in order for the rest of the body then to push down and they create kind of more severe bending.
Would this again be a mechanical and traumatic asphyxia?
Yes.
Mr. Chickens case. So now we go to exhibit number 19. And what is the significance in this photograph?
So that will be the next stage where the blanket is being carefully removed from the face, and then again, it has to be done like a really, done with great care because of the decomposition and layers of the soft tissue. Pretty much being attached to the blanket and peeling off during removal. What also stands out in this particular photograph is that her onesie was not zipped and part of her leg and her body is kind of exposed. She did wear a diaper, disposable diaper, so that was kind of really unusual as far as the some of the testimony how she might have been found originally. And
So you're saying the fact that her clothes were disarray and unzipped would be consistent with that? In your opinion, is that?
that's correct. Yes, I would call this kind of clothes in disarray in the sense that, yes, she's completely unzipped and part of the body is exposed, yes.
And as we go through 19 through 22, or basically, as we get to each one, because you've reviewed these beforehand, they show, these are basically showing a progressive removal of the blanket.
That's correct, yeah, that's progressive removal of the blanket, in particular from the head and neck area because of the tight application and the any careless or fast removal would actually compromise the features and remove parts of the soft tissue from her face and head.
So 19 through 22 then show this slow removal because the whole point is not to destroy the body.
Yes, to preserve as much soft tissue or any other elements of the body as much as possible.
And it would be correct to say because of the tightness, then the more careful and tedious removal is required.
That's correct, and that's why I'm saying that part of the comment that it was not haphazardly just placed on top of the blanket or just a blanket on top of her is that it was tightly applied and wrapped. That had to be unwrapped and that kind of.
So that is shown in Exhibit 19. Is that also shown in Exhibit 20? That whole again progressive removal of the blanket.
Yes, and that's sometimes for to an observer this might seem redundant, but to us it's very important because it shows a kind of deliberate and careful removal of the evidence that later on we can actually then match with the findings that come from the forensic lab and have explanation for the findings as far as the either DNA or any other matter or evidence for that matter.
Let me ask you this. In number 20 that we're on, it shows the blanket. Does it, in a way that's not been before, demonstrate just how large this blanket is and how thick it is?
Exactly. I mean, that's another, I guess, answer to the question, why would it help jury to see these photographs? Because there are different types of blankets, there are different types of fleece. However, this particular blanket was very, very thick and ply that actually kind of double layer on the face, and it was tightly applied on the face. It required actually pretty prolonged careful removal, and I think that the jury would appreciate, although it's not a pleasant view, they would appreciate actually the position of the child and then the packaging of the child with all the elements surrounding her.
And I assume that thicker fleece, larger fleece, wrapped more securely around the face would exacerbate the asphyxiation.
It would make it hard to breathe. That's for
Harder
sure.
to breathe.
Yes.
And so 19 through 21, we'll go to 21, they're all mechanical and traumatic asphyxiation, is that correct?
Yes, and also confirms again the position of the body, which was not forced in any. So pretty much what's important to also note is that during all this removal, her body is as is. Nothing has been moved or manipulated, shifted as far as the extremities or the head and neck area, which is going to be important when we comment on some of these subsequent photographs as far as her positioning.
And then in number 21, does it also show a view of the onesie or the clothing I guess in the amount of the clothing in a way that the other photographs had not?
Yes, it completely confirms that, yeah, that's her clothes originally described with the penguin pattern, purple color.
Does that assist the jury in seeing the size of this child by looking at the size of the onesie, kind of gives them some idea of what kind of clothing this child could fit into and what, in some manner, would that assist the jury in that means as well?
Yes, and the size of the child is important because one of the things that we always ask for when we work up death of a child of that age, around the infant age or toddler age, is that we have to always have access to the pregnancy records, the birth records, pediatric records, and part of the reason is that we want to confirm that she was developing and growing normally. There were no issues with the pregnancy, there were no issues with delivery, there was no issues with her development and growth in the first year in the infant stage, and that also sets the stage as what's really plausible, not plausible, what can happen to a child of a certain age that is developmentally meeting all the milestones and developing just fine and growing just fine, and whether she'll be susceptible to, let's say, overlaying at the age of 14 months, which she wouldn't be because she's actually a well-developed child.
What is overlaying?
Meaning that would be bed sharing in unsafe sleeping environment with an adult overlaying, or being on top of a child, which I've never had a case of a 14-month-old and overlaying. There was only one, I'll take that back, there was only one case of a 2-year-old when an adult actually laid on top of him in bed on purpose, and that was deemed a homicide.
You did have access to the records of this child. I believe medical records up until her last visit was October or November, is that correct?
That's correct.
And there was nothing remarkable regarding her health or her size in those records. Was there or was there not?
I don't recall any, so I did not really review those records for this particular hearing, for the purposes of this hearing, because it was kind of limited scope and purpose of this hearing. But I don't recall any issues as far as development and reaching the developmental milestones.
That takes us to photo number 22, and just briefly, that again just shows another stage in removal of the blanket and the efforts to not destroy evidence.
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go to number 23. And this is the first photograph really of a close-up of the head of the child. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And why is that important to have a photograph of the bare head exposed?
So there are different reasons. Now, one is, again, we are presenting her body in all different stages as is before she's manipulated. So this shows what I explained, close-up, or part of that S, kind of reverse S shape. Well, actually, the way how she's presented here, she's like an S shape folding of the body with overextended and actually twisted neck. Also, the part of her onesie that's kind of in disarray, she's not zipped, so this is not a child that is kind of, I guess, dying in her sleep, so to speak, with the fully zipped onesie. And then the second, or the third thing is that compression of the face. Although the composition is pretty extensive and it's disturbing. However, I think it's really important to show how tightly compressed her face was, because even the advanced decomposition, the facial features, pretty much the skeletal and cartilaginous elements are going to kind of maintain some shape and some semblance of the facial features in people. Her facial features are pretty much flattened. I mean, they're completely flattened or face, so to speak. One can kind of assume where the nose and the head are based on the position of one of the eyelashes where it is. So that kind of confirms the compression of the face, mechanical asphyxia, parts of the traumatic asphyxia because of the severe twisting of the body, which also goes with the confined space, and that's why part of the reason why she's so twisted. And of course, positional asphyxia, which would pretty much prevent her chest from expanding and breathing. So pretty much there will be close-up of how she was found, finally when all the elements are removed, how she presents, and the mechanisms of asphyxia, plus, unfortunately, that's the only way that we can kind of present her identification photograph. It's not much of an identification photograph, but it's as if of the face that in the end is going to be permanently in her record.
And we talked about the blanket on the face. In this photograph shows something the other photographs haven't. And I think this, maybe the next photograph as well, show the pattern from a blanket.
Yes, the fleece imprint on the face. It's especially the right side of the face that's better preserved. That would confirm essentially how she was wrapped, packaged, and then compressed against the sides of the trash can, with a blanket, of course, wrapping the head and face.
With the pattern, again, would that demonstrate in another way that you described that it's wrapped tightly and you can see it moved, but with the pattern, is that a form of evidence that really demonstrates that this was tight enough that on this skin forms really the ridges and the patterns of a blanket?
That's correct.
Is that even more significant to show just exactly how tight and wound this was wrapped around the child's head?
That's correct.
And in 24, again, we have exposure of the head and the closer up. But why is it important that this photograph would be shown to a jury? What would this photograph show that the other photographs have not shown?
So this photograph actually has the head is, so finally now the parts of the body are manipulated to kind of put her in an anatomic position to be properly examined, and then shows essentially how the head and the upper body and the shoulder were actually tightly compressed against each other, and she was so severely twisted that pretty much left a permanent indentation on her torso and on her head, that with deformity that could not be rectified after being put in the anatomic position.
This photograph also shows larva developed around the neck area. What is the significance of that?
So that's one of the factors in this particular kind of slow reveal of the layers is, as I mentioned, that there was a number of pupae and number of larvae. Now, they were not as numerous as we would ordinarily see with the body that is exposed to air and oxygen without any obstruction or any elements that would prevent easy access of the flies to the body. And of course, flies would deposit eggs very, very quickly on a body that started to cool off. So the fact that there's still actually active larvae in this kind of soft decomposition part of the body speaks to the effect now that she was originally tightly packaged and there was no access of the flies to the body. And as the purge fluid and the parts of the body and the cover started to slowly shift, the flies are finally finding their way to the body. So that's why there's discrepancy between the stage of decomposition and the stage in which some of the pupae and larvae are found on the body in different stages as the access to the body is kind of permitted because of the shifting of the covers due to decomposition.
And this would be an example of all four tops of the asphyxiation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's number 25. What was it? Again, this is a further back photograph of the head, but also the entire body with the onesie. What is the significance? What does that photograph show in distinction from the other photographs we've seen here today?
So those two photographs are now shot after all the other elements are removed. The onesie is the only thing that is now left on her with along with the diaper. And then what's I really appreciated in this particular photograph is that not only was the head and neck twisted in a natural and kind of contorted position, but her chest is actually kind of protruding, and then as the body is now finally being shifted to be put in an anatomic position for a further examination, the knees that were compressing actually the area of the diaphragm, the lower chest and upper abdomen now are moving, and you can see how they left the indentation. And that would be another reason for her to not be able to breathe, because the compression to the chest of the diaphragm prevent her, an adult or a child, from breathing. And that's again part of the traumatic and positional asphyxia sort of being shown from just releasing the child from that position into the anatomic position. The number of larvae and the pupa actually now can be appreciated, and they are part of the factor why some of the shift did happen, because they can be, the larvae, the maggots, essentially, they're very aggressive, and they can do a lot of damage to the body, post-mortem damage to the body, and they can introduce a lot of artifacts to the body, and they can actually do, because of their aggressive nature, what they do to human body or any living organism after death. Actually, they can do, they can introduce a lot of artifacts and shift some of the clothing or covers on the body, and that's why access to the body later on for the flies was enabled, because they came into different stages.
Finally, we go to the last photograph, number 26. And would this be a description as is photograph?
Yes, that's as is, now from a different part of the ones that was covering the right side. The left side of the body was partially uncovered. And then it shows as her body is finally being kind of relaxed and put in an anatomic position, kind of the torso now is extended. So now she's essentially being finally manipulated and extended from compressed state into kind of more anatomic position to be examined completely. Because the next stage, and that's shown in photographs that we don't have here, is undressing, and then of course other photographs of her without a diaper in anatomic position.
Does this photograph show decomposition, post-mortem changes?
Yes, the difference, and actually the differential between the wet decomposition of the upper part of the body, especially the head and neck area that was down toward the bottom of the trash can, and then desiccation, mummification of the part of the body that was up, which would be actually even her hands and the feet, the legs.
So, what I guess what you're saying is the upper body, the head, is wet, and the lower part of the body are dry because the body's upside down. It was
Right.
found upside down.
That's correct, and the purge fluid and the fat liquefaction would actually enable and promote further the wet decomposition.
Would this be consistent with the fact that the body was put upside down within this trash can, within this trash bag,
And left leg.
and
Yes.
upside and left lying for some period of time upside down?
Yes.
That it wasn't changed from the right side position. That this would be indicative. This body was placed intentionally upside down
And left like that. Yes.
and left like that
Yes.
to allow the purge fluids to flow to the bottom, which would lead to those parts being wet and the upper part being dry.
That's correct, because it looks like the purge fluid did not reach the lower part of the body, the legs or the anogenital region.
Your Honor, that's all I have at this time.
Well, Doctor, I believe you testified to this, but your testimony and your report are not based on an actual autopsy that you performed. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. I reviewed the autopsy findings and autopsy photographs of Dr. Schmidt.
Okay. And the pictures that we're dealing with here today, are those pictures from the autopsy report that, for Dr. Schmidt, that you relied on?
Yes, everything that was accessible to her, I had access to, yes.
And I believe you said there were others beyond these. that
That's
you rely
correct.
on. Now, I noticed in your report, there is 3 particular photographs included. Do you have a copy of that handy?
I didn't bring my report with me now.
Give me one of those.
You can give them this exhibit.
Okay. And Doctor, I believe it's either exhibit 27 or 28 that contains your report.
28.
28.
Yes, sir.
And as I said, there's 3 particular photographs that you've attached as part of your report.
Yes.
Is there significance why you chose those 3?
The significance essentially showed the stages and layering. Essentially, I had some of the kind of similar cases that I would approach the same way because everything that is the body is in and that is intimately involved and associated with the body essentially belongs to the body and belongs to the medical examiner until released under chain of custody to the law enforcement. So the first one essentially shows that the forensic pathologist medical examiner is there when she's taken out of the trash can, which is very important, because nothing was manipulated or shifted or touched inside that can or inside the bag beforehand. The next, actually, what's really important for me was to show the placement of the foil and how tightly actually one can see the outline of the head and upper body with the foil being attached. So it's not crumpled foil from somebody, I don't know, barbecuing or doing something and then putting it next to the child. It's actually wrapped around the upper part of the child, and the blanket, of course, being more prominent down. And then the next is essentially the photograph of the child, one of the last exhibits that we described, 23, 24, because it's the ID photograph with the contortion of the upper body, especially the neck and chest area, exposure of the body, once not being completely on, plus the compression of the left side of the face, plus the outline and the compression pattern of the blanket and foil, and then essentially differential decomposition pattern. So it would be impossible to attach it all, but it shows kind of different stages of the handling of Evelyn's body that was kind of importance to the cause and mechanism of that.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's why you chose those 3 particular.
Right, so essentially the trash can, the bag, confined space, the foil, the blanket that will be mechanical. The positional actually is kind of its position upside down, but also the contortion of the body, and then finally we have the compression of the face with the blanket and the foil.
Okay. Now, General Stallings asked you several questions about each of those 26 pictures. Do you think that the 3 that you have attached to your report adequately describe the progression that you discussed?
The purpose of attaching these 3 photographs was actually to corroborate the cause and mechanism, and then of course the manner of that. But they are not sufficient. I don't think they're going to be sufficient for the jury to understand exactly how she was found and all the layering and the painstaking effort that took to actually remove all these elements from the body. I think that to understand essentially what I'm talking about, all of these corroborate the cause and manner and mechanism of that, I don't think it would be sufficient to understand essentially the severity of the gravity of the involvement of all these elements in her death.
Okay. So, more specifically, you discussed, well, you're aware, we're only objecting to the pictures from number 12 to number 26.
I'm sorry,
I said you're aware that we're only objecting to pictures number 12 through number 26.
actually I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. So that's the ones if we can focus on those.
Okay.
Do you have the pictures there that
Yes,
you can
it-
refer to? Okay. Is it fair to say that beginning with picture 12 and moving forward, that's where the actual body of Evelyn begins to appear in the pictures?
Emerge, that's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, I believe when you were, if you could turn to number 17. And if you would, when you were testifying, I believe that you stated that that was one of 3 pictures that showed the same stage of the removal of the items.
That's correct.
From her. Which are the other 2?
So the, seems that exhibit 15, 16, and 17 would be different angles of the same stage.
Okay. Then if you could turn over to number 19.
Yes.
And you may have to help me on this one. In your testimony, you stated that that presented some inconsistency with some prior testimony. Do you recall that statement?
I did say something to that effect, yes.
You kind of lost me when you said that. What testimony are you talking about that would be inconsistent with?
Oh, I was referring to actually the state of the dress or undress of the child.
Okay.
That would be inconsistent with simple overlaying.
Okay, okay. So it wasn't actually testimony, just the idea of overlaying.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, then I also noted from your testimony that you said 19 through 22 show the removal of the blanket. Is that a similar situation to 15 through 17? The same thing, just different angles?
No, these are different stages, but it took actually a while to remove the blanket. So they're different angles, but also kind of different stage with careful removal from the front and the back of the body. But essentially, they do all 3 refer to the removal of the blanket, especially from the head and face area.
Okay. So are all 3 of those, in your opinion, necessary for a jury to get a full picture of the issues here?
Of the tightness of the blanket application, now whether the court's going to decide to admit all 3, that's really not up to me. If forensic pathologists actually, we rely on the photographs, so as far as I'm concerned, I would keep it all,
Right.
but obviously that's not a question for me.
Right, okay. And you know, that is the question we're dealing with here today, and that, the next one I want you to look at is number 23. And you gave a very good description of that photograph, but during your testimony, you started off with the statement that it's disturbing, meaning the subject matter is disturbing.
I mean, the whole case is disturbing, so.
I understand, I'm just asking, you made that statement.
Yes, I mean, to a jury member, so they have to be properly prepared.
Fair enough. And so then pictures 24, 25, and 26, those show where the body has been manipulated. Is that accurate?
That's correct. Now, she's finally being kind of decompressed and then extended slowly to be placed in a anatomic position.
So, and I mean, just the way I translate that, when you say that, that means someone has taken a leg or an arm and moved it.
That's correct.
Okay. And can you explain why you feel those pictures, you know, that don't show the position she was in when she was found, why are those important?
So to me, every case actually needs the identification photograph, although they don't look as a regular identification photograph, but that is the identification photograph for this child. So it's important to show that. Number two, it also demonstrates the severity of the twisting and the torsion of the head and neck area with the compression of the upper chest. So that's why especially 24 and 25 to me will be important to show and corroborate some of the mechanism of asphyxia. As far as the 26, I mean, I guess at this particular stage when she's already being undressed and kind of repositioned, that's one that I could definitely testify without. That's your question. But I think the 24 and 25 would be important to corroborate some of the testimony that I would offer.
Now, in this question, I'm just going to ask you to explain this because I don't understand what you mean. You stated a couple of times that larvae can introduce artifact.
Maggots, yes.
Okay, I don't understand what that means.
They're actually very aggressive, and they create defects in the skin. They burrow in the skin. They enter the body. They invade the airways, the gastrointestinal tract, and create essential destruction of the soft tissue. So that's what I meant.
So the term artifact means it's
They
damage.
create a lot of artifact, and that's one of the reasons why either Dr. Schmidt or I could not go beyond the, she said homicidal, and I basically stated asphyxia. I could not corroborate blunt force trauma to the soft tissue because of the maggot larva activity.
Okay, all right. Since you mentioned that, you said several times that the child's head was overextended.
Yes.
When you say that, does that signify an injury?
So it signifies the injury in terms of the positional and the traumatic asphyxia, as far as her head being essentially twisted, reported, pushed in the back. That would actually, I cannot even talk normally in that position because of the compromised airway.
Okay. But there's no indication from yours or Dr. Schmidt's review of this that there was any mechanical injuries.
We could not actually, either she doing the autopsy or me reviewing the photographs and actually slides, because there was actually enough preserved organs and tissues to create a glass slide that we can look under the microscope. So the stage of decomposition and then invasion by the larva was such that would actually compromise any blunt force trauma to the soft tissue. So we didn't find skeletal trauma, but that doesn't mean that there was no soft tissue trauma or the brain trauma, but that could not be commented on because of the stage of decomposition and the maggot infestation.
Could you tell if there was any skeletal injuries?
We did not find skeletal injuries. I reviewed the x-rays and there were, I couldn't find any.
Now, you also testified that part of the child's position could have been post-mortem, meaning her own weight compressing her. Is that accurate?
So yes, a complete kind of accordion-like position that she was. Yeah, the body undergoes changes first of becoming stiff and then becoming lax, and then of course, obviously she was put in that position because before she became stiff, otherwise she would never assume that position. But and that's why that would corroborate her dying in that position, asphyxial death. But then after that, once the rigor or rigidity is gone, and then the body essentially is upside down, some of that shift could happen because of or more of the compression will happen because of the sheer weight of the body.
Okay. And can you say how much of that compression happened due to her own weight?
I don't know because she's decomposed right now, but I can tell you that she would not get in that position just because of sheer weight, if that's what you're asking. As far as as far as the contortion, the twisting, and the compression to the chest, none of that will happen just because of the sheer upside down position of the weight.
Okay, all right. Judge, I believe that's all the questions I have. Redirect?
one question. The reason, if I understand it correctly, the reason you can determine whether or not there were soft tissue injuries, blunt force injuries, is because of the decomposition of the body.
Yes,
So, doesn't mean it didn't happen, it just means because of the time between the death and the finding of the body, that evidence disappeared.
too much artifact was introduced that would prevent us from seeing or commenting on them.
That's all.
Mr. Ross? No, Judge. Doctor, thank you, Ms. Stephanie. Is she free to go?
Yes.
Yes, Judge.
Doctor, you're released from your stand for the day.
Thank you.
Your Honor, we rest.
Are you?
Yes, Your Honor. A photograph is admissible. It's been authenticated, it's relevant, and appropriate value, which is not substantially outweighed by the unfair prejudice. That's State versus Banks. What we're submitting is each one of these 26 photographs presented have been authenticated at the scene where the remains were discovered. Photographs are relevant. They're clear photographs. They're accurate photographs based on the testimony of Agent Fraley and Dr. Mlushnik. Dr. Mlushnik testified to that, as well as Agent Fraley testified how the photographs were taken under the direction of Dr. Schmidt, and where they were taken and how they were moved from the building. Dr. Fraley testified that they accurately depict the process of the collection of remains because he was present and he was there. The photographs showed that the remains, this about the remains, which are relevant. The placement of the remains when they were found, that the body was upside down, there was minimal manipulation in the process of evidence recovery, the bag that surrounded the victim's body, the blanket surrounding the victim's body. The photographs show that the blanket and the fold surrounded the head and the faces of the child, that the manner of application of the blanket and fold surrounding the victim's head and face were deliberate, not haphazard, not accidental. The photograph showed that the compression was against the walls of the trash can, including the position of the neck and the back and the legs and imprints on the face and the flattening of facial features. It also shows the state of the victim's clothing. Photographs showed the characteristics of decomposition by product and its contact with the blanket and fold, and the changes post-mortem, proving the position of the body during decomposition. That is, it was upside down. And relevance, of course, depends on the elements of the offense charged and the means employed in committing the offense. In this case, among the charges we have is felony murder committed in the perpetration or attempt to perpetrate aggravated child abuse, aggravated child neglect, and therefore the state has to prove that the defendant treated the victim in manners to inflict serious bodily injury, which would include death, that the treatment was knowing and other by accidental means, that the defendant neglected the victim, that the act of neglect resulted in serious bodily injury, and that the defendant killed the victim in the perpetration or attempt to perpetrate these underlying offenses of aggravated child abuse and neglect. Also, the defendant is charged with count 17, that the death resulted from another. We charge false report in that she claimed that the child died as a result of being rolled over by an adult while sleeping, which Dr. Mlushnik has said is not true. And she's testified that within a reasonable degree of medical certainty. And so the state has to prove that she knew that the statement that she made about that was false at the time she made it. So we submit that those photographs go to the element of count 17. We also have tampering with evidence, and we have the proof today among the fact that these injuries were sustained, these accumulation, deterioration took place for some time between the death and between the finding of the body, which prevented more than locating the body, the delay, but also beyond that, that possibility of determining blunt trauma was impaired by the age and deterioration of the body. We submit that the relevance of each photograph substantially outweighs any unfair prejudice on the elements of serious bodily injury, knowledge, lack of accident, and killing of the victim. And under Tennessee law, the factors that we look at for admissibility obey the photographs as evidence. You heard Dr. Malushnik talk about how important these photographs were, how they're important for a jury to know and for her to testify to. And she also talked about the inadequacy of testifying without the photographs as to a jury. And we also submit that we need those photographs to rebut defendant's contentions, particularly, specifically, as to count 17, and any argument that these injuries were accidentally caused, inflicted. And we would submit these photographs are not extremely graphic. Yes, they are of a corpse. There's no blood, there's no gaping wounds, there's no facial expressions that can elicit emotions. Yes, doctor said, what she said about these photographs, or what was the term she used? Disturbing. Yes, they're disturbing. Well, all photographs contain, and homicides are. The question is, are they of a nature that a jury could put aside that fact and decide this case on those photographs without being swayed unreasonably or with emotion. And under the Hughes case, these words in this finding was this, let me quote from the Hughes case. Photographs of the corpse are admissible in murder prosecutions if the relevant issues at trial, notwithstanding the gruesome and horrifying character. And the photographs are not necessarily rendered inadmissible because they are cumulative of other evidence or because descriptive words can be used. In this case, we would say, first of all, these are not of the extremely gruesome type where you see murder cases many times that the court has seen and have been tried before you, which there's blood, which there's gaping wounds, which there's facial expressions of the person dead. We don't have that here. Yes, the photographs are cumulative, but they are for a purpose. They show the stages in which the evidence is obtained, which was examined, and also the cumulative nature show the real nature of the injuries. And the fact is that they're asphyxiation and not another cause. So photographs, because they're cumulative, and because they're a corpse, in and of itself is not enough. The court has to look in the whole context of the case, the charges, and the facts as heard in here at today's hearing, the testimony of the expert as to the necessity of these photographs being used to describe the injuries, and the fact that they would, that her testimony elicited would not articulate in itself enough to really explain to the jury the significance of the injuries and how we corroborate those injuries. And we do have the burden of proof because we do have a murder case and we have child abuse in the leg. So for those reasons, we believe the photographs are admissible. And I would say this, I know there's that last shot that she said, but however, she did talk about in that photograph the fact that the body, it demonstrates the body had been upside down and it was placed there, not manipulated some other way. And also, we would also submit, if you have concerns about the photographs of the head, we would submit that these photographs showing the body would show the context and the size of the body. But if there's concerns about the pattern and the eyelashes, the state could crop those photographs to show that so that we can demonstrate just how tight the blanket and aluminum foil, particularly the blanket with the patterns in the skull. In that case, the court could accommodate and could do that, which would not undercut the point that we want to make, is that the blanket was so tight because of the pattern, the grooves basically on the head of the skull of the child. So there is a remedy for that if the court determines there's unnecessarily cumulative photographs of the head.
show gaping wounds or that type of thing. These are color pictures of the decomposing body of an 18-year-old child. That in itself is disturbing. So I respectfully disagree with the general about that. But 18-month-old child. Oh, I'm sorry, 18-month-old. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Judge. Our objection to pictures 12 through 26 is based solely on our position that the probative value of those pictures is outweighed by the undue prejudice that they create in a juror's minds. The State versus Willis case, which we've supplied the court with the appropriate case law previously, makes the statement that it is deemed unfairly prejudicial if it has an undue tendency to suggest decision on an improper basis. Commonly, they're not necessarily an emotion. And, I think that the doctor's testimony, where she herself said that these were disturbing, is very telling about that. Our position on those photographs is that while they may be probative, they may have value, that is outweighed by its prejudicial effect that it would have on the jury, the emotional reaction the jury would have to these. The general pointed out some of the issues. I would point out that in State versus Banks, quoting another state's case law, is that in a felony homicide case, some of the issues that the general's arguing are not as relevant as they would be in a premeditated first-degree murder case. And then lastly, I think the language here is exactly what we're arguing, is that that case states that shocking and horrifying the jury emotionally does not assist them in making a reasoned determination. So our position is that those particular pictures would result in an emotional reaction from the jury, which would hinder their ability to reach a rational decision. We're asking the court to suppress those 14 pictures.
All right. Your Honor, go ahead, just quickly, Banks, in page, I believe, 43, the state says, the court says, in determining whether any prejudice that might result from the admission of photographs of affair, the trial court is permitted to take into account the nature of the crimes at issue. Here, the state sought to prove more than recklessness or even intent without premeditation, as the columns. The grisly photos in this case captured the expected, indeed desired result of a series of purposeful, deliberate acts by the perpetrator. As to Adam, the perpetrator first decided to kill the victim, and then it goes on to describe. And so, the conclusion they made is they described these photographs. They said, insofar as photographs tend to be shocking and gruesome, is because the crime depicted is of that sort. In this case, yes, we have felony murder, but we also have felony murder of a child, and we have aggravated assault, we aggravated child abuse, and aggravated child neglect. And we also have to prove intentionality to prove the elements within felony murder. So intentional acts is required. And I think the court can look at the nature of the crime committed, and based on that, we think that these photographs should be admitted. I'm sorry, that was from Willis, not from Banks.
I was following along.
I apologize.
So I'm gonna take each photograph individually. Of course, 1 through 11 are stipulated to agree, and of course, well, I say individually. First of all, pursuant to Dr. Malushnik's testimony, the court finds that all of the photographs, 12 through 26, are all relevant in the case. She testified very clearly that as to what each individual photograph, how it related to her findings with regard to the cause of death, the 4 different mechanisms of fixing that she relied upon. So I think that the easy part of this is that they're all relevant. Now, the harder part of this is whether the probative value of the photograph is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Give me just a second. It's interesting because in Willis, the Supreme Court, at one point, uses that standard. So the Supreme Court when discussing the Court of Criminal Appeals decision in Willis, stated that the intermediate appellate court found the defendant failed to establish that the probative value of the photographs was substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. Then, the next paragraph, the Supreme Court talks about the admissibility of photographic evidence that lies within the sound discretion of the trial court. Talks about what relevant evidence is, any tendency to make the existence of any fact as a consequence to the determination of the action more or less probable than it would be without the evidence. But it goes on to say that relevant evidence may be excluded if its probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice. To decide whether visual evidence is admissible, the court determines the relevance of the evidence and weighs the probative value against any undue prejudice. It is deemed unfairly prejudicial if it has an undue tendency to suggest decision on an improper basis, commonly though not necessarily emotional. And then there are factors to consider in determining admissibility of photographic evidence of a victim in a murder case. The matters to be taken into consideration include the value of photographs as evidence, that is, their accuracy and clarity, and whether they were taken before the corpse was moved, if the position and location of the body when found is material, the inadequacy of testimonial evidence in relating the facts to the jury, and the need for the evidence to establish a prima facie case of guilt or to rebut the defendant's contentions. State versus Lafferty and Banks, factors that come into play in the balancing process may include whether the photographs are in color or black and white, when they were taken in relation to the crime, whether they are close-ups or enlargements, their degree of gruesomeness, the cumulative nature of the evidence, and whether facts shown are disputed by the jury. So when we look at it's a color photograph, it's not a close-up. It depicts the removal of aluminum foil from the body, shows the body wrapped in a blanket. The court finds that the probative value of Exhibit 12 is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. So Exhibit 12 will be allowed as is. Thirteen is similar, but it does show the hand and it shows a little bit farther away. It again shows the foil, shows the back of the head. I think 13, the probative value is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect, it will be allowed as is. I think 14 is cumulative. With 13, so 14 will be disallowed. Uh, 15 shows the blanket face. 15 shows better, I think, than, in my opinion, than 14, the reverse S of the decomposition, of the compression that Dr. Malishnik was talking about. It is not gory. Court finds that the probative value is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. 15 will be allowed as is. Dr. Malishnik stated it's the same stage of the removal of the layers, just a different angle. finds the prejudicial effect of this photo outweighs the probative value. It's, 17 is the same stage, at a different angle. It's from the front. It's actually the first picture from taken from the front. It clearly shows the blanket tightly wrapped around the child's head. Court finds that the probative value of this photograph is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial video evidence. Then exhibit 18, it's the first photo that shows the blanket being totally removed. And it shows the compression. Court finds the probative value of photo 18 is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. Again, there is some of that discharge. What did she call it? The
Purge.
purge fluid. But it's not that much. And I think it's important for the jury to understand what that is and what it means. Court finds in exhibit 18, probative value is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. Exhibit 19. This is the first in the series that Dr. Mlushnik talked about, the blanket being removed from around the head. And in that series, she said it was 19, 20, 21, and 22. The picture's not gruesome. There is the discharge fluid. The picture clearly shows the reverse S. Compression position that Dr. Mlushnik was talking about. court finds that the property value is not substantially outweighed by prejudice. Review item. Court finds that 20, 21, and 22 are cumulative, that we disallow. Three is close up of the face of the child once the layers have been removed. Twenty-three, I think it's the close-up nature of this problem, this photograph's gonna be a problem. Court finds that the property value is outweighed by prejudicial effect of the disallowed. 24 as well. Twenty-five is not a close-up. It shows the compressed nature of the head and neck, shows the compressed nature of the abdomen and the chest. It shows the face, it's not close up. The tight wrapping. be admissible, it'll be black and
Agreed.
white.
Yeah, I understand, John, your orders.
I think if that's a black and white photo, that'll lessen some of that discharge fluid. But I think it's important for there to be a picture showing according to Dr. Illusion's testimony, showing the difference of the wet areas and the dry areas of the child. So that has probative value. Of course, I think the black and white nature will lessen any prejudicial effect such that the probative value would not be substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. I'm going to allow black and white. And then finally, exhibit 26. Other than the discharge fluid, there's nothing necessarily gruesome about this from the top and from behind. The court finds that the probative value is not substantially outweighed by prejudicial effect. Exhibit 26 will be allowed. That's all.
All right, we've already got our next court date.
It's December
16 at 1:30.
16th. Mayor, we would ask, just remind court that, maybe it needs to be